My name is Kofi, and I come from a small village called Anans, nestled just at the edge of the vast Oduro Kingdom. It was a place where the soil was rich, the trees were tall, and the rivers ran clear. Life was simple, and people were content, but everything changed when Prince Ade was born. Prince Ade was the only son of King Ose, the ruler of Oduro, and from the moment he was born, it was clear that he was different. The day he was born, the sky turned dark even though it was midday. The elders whispered that it was a bad omen, but no one dared to say it aloud. The king was overjoyed to have a son, then he celebrated for days, blind to the signs that something was wrong. As a child, Ade was spoiled beyond measure. The king gave him anything he wanted, and the servants and villagers were ordered to treat him with the utmost respect. But even as a boy, Ade's eyes held a coldness that unsettled those around him. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was never a smile of warmth or joy, but rather a twisted grin that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. He would spend hours alone, wandering the palace grounds or staring into the fire. He rarely played with the other children, and when he did, it usually ended in tears or blood. The other children learned quickly to avoid him, but no one could escape his cruelty for long. Ade would seek out the weakest among them, finding joy in their pain. He would pull the wings off of insects and watch them struggle, his eyes wide with fascination. The Queen Ade's mother passed away when he was just 5 years old. Some say that her death was the final blow that pushed Ade toward darkness. She had been the only one who could soften his heart, but with her gone, there was no one left to hold him back. The king, grieving the loss of his beloved queen, only grew more indulgent with his son, showering him with gifts and ignoring his growing cruelty. As Ade grew older, his cruelty only deepened. He became more withdrawn, disappearing into the forest for days at a time. When he returned, he would have strange charms and fetishes with him, small carved figures, bundles of feathers, and bones tied with red thread. The elders whispered that he had gone to the witch doctor who lived in the darkest part of the forest, a man feared by all for his dark powers. But no one dared to question the prince, and the king refused to see the truth about his son. Life in Anans continued, but a sense of unease had settled over the village. The older folk said that the air itself had changed, that it felt heavier, like a storm was always on the horizon. The trees seemed to loom taller, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers, and the birds no longer sang as they once did. The villagers went about their daily tasks with a sense of dread, always looking over their shoulders, as if expecting something terrible to happen. Then, the disappearances began. It started with Amma, a sweet girl of 12, who was last seen fetching water from the river. She never made it home, and despite a frantic search by the villagers, she was never found. Her mother wailed for days, her cries echoing through the village. Not long after, another girl, Abina, went missing on her way back from the market. The pattern continued, one by one, young girls vanished without a trace, leaving their families devastated. The fear in the village was palpable. Parents kept their children close, refusing to let them wander too far from home. The streets that were once filled with the laughter of children were now eerily silent. The market, usually bustling with activity, grew quieter as people hurried through their tasks, eager to return to the safety of their homes before nightfall. The elders of the village held a meeting. They were the wisest among us, men and women who had seen many seasons come and go. They gathered in the village square, under the shade of the old baobab tree, their faces etched with worry. I was there that day, standing at the edge of the crowd, listening to their hushed voices. "We must send a message to the king," or one of the elders said. "These disappearances are not natural. We need his help." "But who will deliver the message?" another elder asked. "The journey to the palace is long, and the forest is dangerous." There was a heavy silence. No one wanted to risk the wrath of the prince or the dangers of the forest. Finally, one of the younger men, Kwame, stepped forward. He was strong and brave, known for his skills as a hunter. "I will go," he said, his voice steady. "I will take the message to the king." The elders nodded in agreement, and Kwame set off for the palace the next morning. We all watched him go, hoping that he would return with the king's soldiers to protect us. But when Kwame returned days later, he was alone. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with fear. He told us that when he arrived at the palace, he had been granted an audience with the king. Kwame had fallen to his knees before the king, telling him of the disappearances and begging for help. But the king had only looked at him with empty eyes and dismissed him with a wave of his hand. The prince was there, Kwame said, his voice trembling. He was standing behind the king, watching me. His eyes, they were like a snake's, cold and unblinking. I felt like he could see right through me. Kwame's words sent a chill through the crowd. The king would do nothing when we were on our own. The elders knew that we could not confront the prince directly, but they began to whisper among themselves, searching for a solution. But as more girls went missing, it became clear that no one knew how to stop the darkness that was creeping into our village. One night, after days of searching for firewood, I found myself in the forest longer than I had intended. The sun had set, and the moon was rising, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence. As I made my way back to the village, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks, a scream, sharp and filled with terror, followed by a strange chant that sent a shiver down my spine. It was coming from deep within the forest, from a place that I had always been told to avoid. The old shrine. The shrine was ancient, older than the village itself. It was a place where the spirits of the forest were said to dwell, and only the most powerful witch doctors dared to go there. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, and no one ever ventured near it. But the sound was coming from that direction, and I knew I had to see what was happening. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept closer, my footsteps silent on the forest floor. I stayed hidden behind a tree, peering through the darkness. The moonlight illuminated the clearing where the shrine stood, its crumbling stones covered in moss and vines. In the center of the clearing, surrounded by strange symbols drawn in the dirt, stood Prince Adi. He was not alone. A young girl, one of the missing villagers, was tied up and gagged in the center of the circle. Her eyes were wide with fear, tears streaming down her face. The prince held a knife in his hand, its blade glinting in the moonlight. He was chanting in a language I did not understand, his voice low and menacing. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but I was frozen in place. I could only watch in horror as the prince raised the knife and brought it down on the girl. Her scream was cut short, and the forest went silent. The air around the prince seemed to shimmer, and I felt a cold breeze brush past me, as if the very spirits of the forest were watching. The prince whispered something under his breath, and the symbols on the ground glowed faintly before fading away. The girl lay still, her lifeless body a dark silhouette against the earth. I felt sick to my stomach, my legs trembling with fear. I knew I had to get back to the village to tell the others what I had seen. But as I turned to leave, a twig snapped under my foot. The prince's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness. I held my breath, pressing myself against the tree, praying that he would not see me. After what felt like an eternity, he turned away and disappeared into the forest, leaving the shrine in eerie silence. When I returned to the village, I was in a daze, my mind reeling from what I had witnessed. I went straight to the elders, telling them everything I had seen. Their faces grew pale as I spoke, and they exchanged worried glances. "The prince has angered the spirits," one of the elders said, his voice trembling. "He has brought a curse upon us all." The news spread through the village like wildfire. The crops that had once thrived in our fertile soil began to wither overnight. The cornfields, once tall and green, turned brown and brittle. The yams rotted in the ground, and the fruit trees bore no fruit. The villagers began to grow thin and weak, their faces gaunt with hunger. The animals, too, were affected. The goats and chickens died without reason, their bodies found stiff and cold in the morning. Even the river, our lifeline, seemed to slow, its once clear waters turning murky and foul. People began to fall ill with strange ailments that no healer could cure. Children who were once full of energy grew listless, their eyes dull and hollow. The village was gripped with fear, and the once bustling streets were now empty and silent. The villagers huddled in their homes, afraid to venture out, as if the darkness that had taken hold of our land would swallow them whole. I felt a deep sense of guilt, knowing that I had seen the prince's wickedness but had been too afraid to stop it. The thought of the young girl at the shrine haunted me, her lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. The image of the prince, his cold eyes and twisted grin, filled my nightmares. I could not shake the feeling that the spirits were watching me, that they knew I had been there that night and done nothing. The king, still blind to the truth about his son, did nothing to stop the prince. The villagers began to lose hope, believing that we were doomed to suffer under the curse that had been brought upon us. The elders tried to perform rituals to appease the spirits, but nothing worked. The darkness continued to spread, and it seemed that there was no escape. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a group of hunters arrived in our village. They were from a distant land, having heard rumors of the curse that had befallen our village. They were strong men, tall and broad-shouldered, with fierce eyes that seemed to pierce through the gloom. They were known for their skills in tracking and fighting, and they had come to confront the source of the evil that plagued our land. The leader of the hunters was a man named Badu. He was older than the others, his hair streaked with gray, but his muscles were still strong and his eyes sharp. He spoke to the elders, listening intently as they told him of the prince and the disappearances. I was there, standing in the background, watching as the hunters discussed their plan. Badu turned to me, his gaze steady. "You are the one who saw the prince at the shrine?" he asked. I nodded, my throat dry. "Yes," I whispered. "I saw him. I saw him kill the girl." Badu's expression was grim. "You must lead us to the shrine. We will confront the prince and end this curse." Fear gripped my heart at the thought of returning to that place, but I knew I could not refuse. The villagers were counting on us to save them, and I had to find the courage to face the prince once more. The night of the full moon, the hunters and I set out into the forest. The air was thick with tension, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The darkness seemed to close in around us as we made our way through the trees, the path to the shrine growing narrower and more treacherous with each step. I led the way, my heart pounding in my chest. The memory of the prince at the shrine was fresh in my mind, and I could feel the weight of the hunters' eyes on my back. They were counting on me, and I could not let them down. As we neared the clearing, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over us. The hunters gripped their weapons tightly, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the ground. When we reached the shrine, the sight before us was even more disturbing than I had remembered. The strange symbols were still etched into the ground, but they seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural light. The air was thick with the smell of blood, and the ground was stained dark where the girl had been sacrificed. And there, standing in the center of the clearing, was Prince Ode. He was surrounded by his fetishes and charms, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. His face twisted into a cruel smile as he saw us approach, as if he had been expecting us. "So, you have come to stop me," the prince said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Fools! You do not understand the power I now possess." Badu stepped forward, his eyes locked on the prince. "We know what you have done, Ode," he said, his voice steady. "You have angered the spirits and brought a curse upon this land. It ends tonight." The prince laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "You think you can stop me? I have the power of the spirits on my side. I am invincible." Without warning, the prince raised his hand, and the symbols on the ground flared with a blinding light. The air around us crackled with energy, and a powerful wind whipped through the clearing, swirling the leaves and dust into a vortex. The hunters braced themselves, their weapons at the ready, but the force of the wind was overwhelming. The prince began to chant in the strange, ancient language, his voice rising above the roar of the wind. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and the trees groaned as if they were being torn apart. The hunters struggled to stay on their feet, but Badu stood firm, his eyes never leaving the prince. In a swift motion, Badu pulled out a small pouch from his belt and tossed it into the air. The contents scattered into the wind, and the effect was immediate. The light from the symbols flickered and dimmed, and the wind began to die down. The prince's chant faltered, and his expression twisted into one of rage and fear. "What have you done?" the prince screamed, his voice filled with panic. Badu stepped forward, his voice calm and commanding. These are the ashes of those you have wronged, mixed with the sacred herbs of the forest. The spirits are no longer on your side, Ode. Your power is broken. The prince's eyes widened with terror as he realized that his power was slipping away. He lashed out in desperation, raising his knife to strike, but the hunters were ready. With a swift, coordinated movement, they surged forward, overpowering the prince and disarming him. The struggle was fierce, but the hunters were strong and determined. The prince fought like a cornered animal, his eyes wild with fear, but he was no match for their skill and strength. Finally, they managed to bind his hands and feet with ropes, securing him to the ground. The clearing fell silent, the air still and heavy. The prince lay on the ground, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his eyes filled with defeat. The hunters stood over him, their faces grim but resolute. Badu knelt beside the prince, his voice low and firm. You will pay for your crimes, Ode. You have brought suffering to your people, and the spirits demand justice. With that, Badu spoke words of power, and the ground beneath the prince seemed to tremble. The symbols on the ground faded away, and the darkness that had surrounded us began to lift. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling that had weighed on our hearts began to dissipate. The curse was broken. The next morning, the king was informed of his son's capture. The news spread quickly through the kingdom, and the villagers gathered in the square, waiting for the king's arrival. There was a sense of relief in the air, but also a deep sadness. We had lost many, and the scars of the prince's actions would take time to heal. When the king arrived, he was a shadow of the man he had once been. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes filled with sorrow. When he saw his son, bound and broken, the truth finally broke through his denial. Tears welled up in the king's eyes as he realized the extent of the darkness that had taken hold of his son. With a heavy heart, the king ordered that Prince Ade be exiled from the kingdom and never to return. The prince was taken away, his eyes filled with bitterness and hatred, but there was no one left to pity him. The people of Anans and the surrounding villages began to rebuild their lives, slowly but surely. The crops grew again, the animals recovered, and the dark cloud that had hung over us lifted. But even now, many years later, we still remember the wicked prince of Oduro and the terror he brought to our land. The old shrine in the forest remains untouched, a place of darkness that no one dares to go near. The villagers speak of it in hushed tones, warning their children to stay away, for the spirits that were angered by the prince's deed still linger there. As for me, I have never returned to the shrine. The memory of that night still haunts me, the image of the prince's twisted grin burned into my mind. I know that the darkness has been driven away, but I cannot shake the feeling that it is never truly gone. It lingers in the shadows, waiting for another to stir it from its slumber. And that is why, to this day, we live in both fear and gratitude, remembering the hunters who saved us, and the wicked prince who nearly destroyed us all.